So for me, the hope still resides in the chances that we now have to build a different understanding of what society could look like, much more compassionate, much more supportive, much more community-based, much less dependent on consumerism, much less dependent on the idea that money is the means by which we buy happiness, much gentler in a way, and of course, much more attuned to the natural world.
We are on an adventure to unite the stories and solutions of the pioneers, creating a better future for all. Together, we will journey to every continent, every country and community, and ask the question, what is the future you dream of? We will explore the blockers to us getting there, and we will ask, what will it take? What do we need? What do you need to create a future where we all thrive in balance and harmony with nature and each other? In this episode, we welcome renowned environmentalist, sustainability campaigner, writer, member of the British Green Party, and founder-director of Forum for the Future. We talk about intergenerational justice, intersectionality. We explored citizen leadership and civil disobedience, and the blocker that is the indifference of so many people. We adventured politics and political funding, the juxtaposition of oil investment and climate action, nuclear power, EV or maybe not to EV, energy and energy efficiency, and Jonathon's book, Hope in Hell, a decade to confront the climate emergency. My heart is wide open for Jonathon, and I am deeply grateful for the encouragement and support he gave at the very beginning of the Future Planet journey, which is why it is a great pleasure to bring this conversation to you at the start of our journey together. You can read the action takeaways from this episode, comment, co-create future episodes, and connect with fellow changemakers in the Future Planet community of action by visiting futureplanet.love to sign in or sign up. Let's get into it.
Some people that are new might not know your illustrious career, right? Like
you never know.
Just discovering you. Well, I think looking at the intersectional nature of what we need to do, like a lot of young people are joining the movement now, and they're thinking, what do we do? What can we do? But actually people like yourself have been there for quite some time being like, yeah, we're doing this. And actually it's about bringing their youthful energy into insight and the knowledge that you already have. And you write about intersectionality in youth, don't you?
I certainly do. Intergenerational justice and intersectionality, getting people to understand you can't just address the climate emergency in itself. You have to think about it much more deeply in terms of society and how we live together and all the rest of it. And there are a lot of people, there, what I call them climate geeks, who just think narrow focus, climate story. It's not like that. It's a very different tapestry of ideas we have to weave together.
I love that. I met someone recently that talks about patchwork of solutions. I love that idea of like everyone's got their bit and they can bring their bits together. So I feel like I know and love you, and I have the pleasure of knowing a little bit about your career. Maybe you might like to give a small introduction to yourself so people that are listening.
Yeah. Well, I struck lucky in as much as I read a couple of really brilliant books about this stuff back in 1972, Limits to Growth and Blueprint for Survival. And that kind of set me on my path. Joined the Green Party in 1974. Spent 10 years in the Green Party while I was a teacher in a big comprehensive school in West London. Then went to Friends of the Earth. Then went to the Earth Summit in 1992. Saw all these world leaders and big business people and, spiritual leaders, everybody coming together. And I thought, okay, this is it. This is where we start. At long last, I was saying, at long last, even in 1992, okay? So anyway, I felt pretty fired up by that and came back and got involved in setting up Forum for the Future and the Prince of Wales's business and sustainability program, all of these different initiatives, which happily are still making their contribution to the troubled world we live in now. But the focus has been on solutions really now, since 1992. It's been 30 years of trying to bang the drum for, if you can think positively about the solutions, push them forward, the many barriers that are still in the way can be removed. Because you putting your ideas into that space positively. You're not just campaigning negatively and angrily about all the things that have gone wrong. You're always trying to put that positive energy in as a substitute for the things that are going wrong today.
I think there's been a shift change as well. I think even in the last 2 years, I mean, you will have noticed probably many shift changes over the time of your career, but I think in the last 2 years, we've seen a huge amount of hiring happening across loads of different organizations and business, huge amounts of business leadership, I think, where perhaps that was lacking, and a lot of other citizen leadership. You mentioned the need for civil disobedience as being part of your, like, what I think you mentioned 3 levers, I think, or 3 focus areas.
Yeah.
How do you think do you think that's changed the narrative? How do you think that's changed the narrative? Has it brought people's awareness more to things? And what would come after that because it's not the whole solution, right?
Yeah, I mean, it remains pretty controversial. And obviously we've had a wave of new style protest with Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil that has polarized opinions about the role of civil disobedience. I think for me, it's very clear we're not going to get to the place where we need to be without a lot more civil disobedience. I just don't see it happen. I don't see the mindset of our politicians moving fast enough to get us to that point. So we're going to need a lot of additional, I suppose you'd call it aggressive politics. I don't mean aggressive as in violence, but I mean clearly stated, uncompromising, reminding people of personal responsibility across generations and in their own communities, and being very outspoken about that and not kind of hoodwinked by the wretched level of greenwash that we get today, because greenwash is everywhere. Everybody is doing it.
Well, greenwash has gone exponential.
What's gone exponential?
Greenwash has gone exponential.
It has. Oh, don't do that, Carl. That's not good news, as you know. But what I love about Just Stop Oil, and I'm supporting them, and I know they've caused a lot of disruption. They've made a lot of people very grumpy. But the truth is they have an extremely simple objective. And the objective is that the UK government should stop lying about its readiness to address climate change by cancelling these new licenses they're going to bring forward for oil and gas extraction in the North Sea. You cannot go on having it says we care passionately about climate change and we're doing more than most countries in the world. But hey, presto, look at what we're doing here in the North Sea. 100 new licenses for new development of oil and gas. So Just Stop Oil, very clear campaigning goal. Just deal with that hypocrisy, and then we can get on and think about some of these other things.
Yeah, I love the aims of it. I wonder how much the methodology does to win the hearts and minds of the next group of people beyond what still is perhaps the early adopters into a little bit of the early majority, right? I wonder whether we need them, and B, whether it wins. Like, at what point do you need to move to a more constructive form of?
Well, you need all of that. Just Stop Oil is not the answer to the inertia that we face in society, but it's part of the response to that. And sure, they're alienating a lot of people, but quite honestly, it's probably not a bad thing. I've been very conscious of the analogy that's going on now around the women's suffrage movement at the start of the 20th century, literally 100 years ago, when you have many of the same debates, when Emmeline Pankhurst sets up the Women's Social and Political Union, the suffragettes, and begins to launch this campaign of direct action, which doesn't get anywhere. And then they launch a campaign of violence. Now, I'm not saying that's what the climate movement should be doing here, but they launch a campaign of violence, which starts by breaking people's windows. And then they go further and they start firebombing letterboxes and railway stations and putting bombs in places. And of course, the suffragettes got massive pushback, including pushback from a lot of women who said,
women and from the state.
Yes. And of course.
Politicians
using violence, claiming that this was a just war against oppressive male domination, clearly made a lot of people very uncomfortable. But Emmeline Pankhurst said to one of her friends who kept on saying, "You're making me very uncomfortable." She said to her friend, "I'm glad you're uncomfortable, because you being comfortable never got us anywhere, did it?" And don't forget, the suffrage movement by 1913 was already 30, if not 40 years old. And they'd been fighting for women's suffrage for 30 years. Got nowhere. So look, all I'm saying is that for me, civil disobedience is part of a spectrum of responses to what we're doing, and an important part of it. And I think we should be, personally, I'm full of admiration for what those campaigners are doing. They're brave, they're outspoken, they have total integrity, in my opinion. They're not attention seekers, as people try and make out. They're really doing what they think is right.
Yeah, and vulnerable. And I think I really support the people, their intentions and what they're doing. Absolutely. It's been interesting to being in the thick of the group of people that are working proactively within organizations or wherever to work on these challenges. Yeah. It's been interesting to notice, I think there's a couple of points. So certainly after XR, how many people that were working, as in, I guess would call them professionals, but that were part of XR or went to be part of that movement, either as with their endorsement of their organization or on their own. But actually what happened after that was they had so much more ability to get things across the line. And they had so much more ability to get attention from people within their business to do things that they could then practically implement, so maybe they were going for clean energy, or maybe they were going for, I don't know, scope 3, whatever they were going for. They then had this sort of more permission. I think there was a moment where they had a lot more. And I think now people are asking the question, I think particularly around the arts and protest, because I think that's there's two quite controversial things there. And it's interesting when they're coupled together. And so there are people having conversations about that element of it. And for me, I feel like there is a moment where I guess industry needs to stand up themselves, right? If we feel like other people are leading in a way that feels uncomfortable, and that's great, and we need that, then we also need to stand up and lead in another way. And I feel, myself included, for a long time, it's been quite difficult because we're all quite humble, I think, that work in sustainability. So to stand up and for us to lead, I think, as well, is an interesting, like, if we can see a better way. And I've started to see a lot more of that happen now. But I think that's also, something that would like to see.
I think I agree with you, Carl. And the standing up bit that you're referring to has been going on.
It has, yeah. And
more in some sectors than other sectors.
Yeah.
But, for me, as you mentioned, I want to hear business leaders stand up and speak out, because they often are doing good stuff, but they don't particularly want to make a noise about it. I want to hear more from teachers and educators, for instance. I spent the last 10 years of my life as chancellor of a university, Keele University here in the UK, and I loved it. But when I looked at the sector as a whole, they were hardly on the front line of encouraging young people in universities to become better informed, more active, engaged in their communities. They were playing, I would call it, pretty much a laggard's role, in all honesty. Keele University was doing a fantastic job, but I was looking at the sector as a whole. And then you've got young people to take into account. And because of the COVID years, an awful lot of people have forgotten just how influential it was when young people began to make their voices heard back in 2019. It was massive, absolutely massive. And it had a huge impact on government. The UK government, for better or worse, became the first government in the world to have a statutory legislated target for net zero by 2050. And I can tell you, what young people were doing in 2019 played a huge part in that. So we should be mindful of how this standing up and speaking out can impact differently on different parts of the system, depending on conditions.
Yeah, that feels true. I've also really noticed that this wasn't the case before. So previously, within the context of people standing up, so previously what might happen is people might be sensitive to where their money came from, so they might not stand up so quickly, and so they might not say, oh, I wish my company would do this, or we could do this better. I've noticed a real increase of the level of transparency and bravery around people acknowledging that they're on a journey and being open about that journey, and almost often being transparent about where they are on that journey in as humans, which I think has been a huge step change, actually. And I think it's that, because there really needs to be a going beyond the case studies, which we've certainly seen in the Future Planet community and in other spaces as well. But one really needs to be honest about the challenges that one's facing, and then look at those in a very, I guess, almost vulnerable way, and give oneself permission to not be in a good place, and to be able to say, hang on, we've highlighted this challenge,
But in the Future Planet community, are you talking about some of the blockers, for instance? Are you talking about some of the incumbent companies and industries which are partly responsible for us not making the progress that we ought to be making?
Would you like to talk more about what those blockers are?
Well, there are people who represent much of the accumulated wealth and power from the last 100 years. I call them the incumbency. And they have become so influential because, of course, politicians defer to them, and they are very often, in other countries as well, dependent on them for financial support. So in America, big oil, big pharma, big mining, big ag, intensive agricultural operations, they basically own politicians. And it's legal. It's all above board. Everybody knows how much money these politicians are getting from these very big, very powerful companies. So the politicians very rarely do what they know they should be doing because they're still looking back to the people who provide the payroll for their offices and their campaigns. And for me, I've become less and less tolerant about the bullshit that you hear from those incumbent interests because it's malign. It's genuinely evil. And if you talk about big oil in particular, everybody working for an oil or gas company now, they know what their companies and their products are doing to the prospects for humankind right now and, of course, in the future. So how they square it with themselves every morning when they get up out of bed and look at themselves in the mirror and think to themselves, well, this is a wonderful, gainful, highly responsible company and work that I'm doing. But in reality, of course, what they're doing is trashing life on Earth.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also feel like we in ourselves are lying if we don't think we're complicit in that. Like, I feel like I think pointing just at big oil doesn't really work. Like, it's so entrenched in everything that we would use or do. I wonder if I have seen recently, and I guess in saying that, I think we all need to take responsibility, right? I think in a way, if we use whataboutism when we point at oil, we're effectively avoiding doing the thing that we need to do, which is make sure that we've got renewable energy in our supply chain factories or whatever the level, whatever those particular challenges that we need to solve are.
But Carl, it's not either or.
I totally agree.
You need to be absolutely rigorous in the analysis of why we are not making that faster progress. Because if you're not rigorous in the analysis, when you come up with advice to people about what needs to happen, that advice won't be as attuned to reality as it needs to be. That's the only reason why I'm pressing the point about rigor in analysis, because the prescription for doing things better depends on being absolutely honest about the situation we find ourselves in, uncomfortable though it might be.
It's not, it doesn't feel that uncomfortable for me. It feels like it's just a set of challenges. I was thinking about, obviously it should feel uncomfortable, but I was thinking about the more that I look at it, the more that I feel like you unlock systems change through being systematic. And this might not be the only way to do it, right? But there might be other parts to it. But for example, if we think about the challenge of renewable energy in the manufacturing supply chain, and the business might not own its factories. So suddenly you've got this challenge where even if you're a mid-size or large SME, you probably you're not owning your own factories, and there are multiple people using those factories. So the challenge of getting renewable energy into your supply chain in India or Vietnam or wherever it might be, in America, wherever, is a challenge of collaboration where you've got to take the time to go and build those different relationships with those different people. That brings back to a challenge of a sustainability person who's got like a myriad of things that they're doing and they're under-resourced, and therefore how are they going to build that collaboration to then unlock that particular piece of the puzzle? So I think the more I look at it, the more I think that you need a template for doing that at scale to get to the point where you can then try and affect policy and regulation, because I haven't seen regulation and policy. I probably don't know enough, but I haven't seen it working extremely well, even in instances where, this is where I'd love to receive your knowledge on it, but even in instances where for example, in DRS, deposit return scheme in the UK, it's taking so long to get that across the line, right? Like, what are you seeing that's working in that space? And like, could you add more to perhaps that like line of thought? Like, what has been your experience at Forum or in other areas? Like, how do we unlock? Because it's very easy to say, oh, well, this is the problem. But what feels difficult about that is it's so challenging How do you change politics, right? Like, that's challenging. So how do we get there? Is I'm interested in, like, what are the steps?
Yeah, and it's messy, always messy.
It's messy.
But you have to have the right kind of market framing for these things to work. So one out-and-out success story for us in the UK, and now increasingly for the world, is offshore wind.
Yeah.
We happen to have a regulatory system and a government policy that drove investment into offshore wind quite early on, before it had really established the viability of the industry at the scale it's now operating at.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, a lot of that painful learning was done quickly.
Yeah.
We now have a world-beating offshore industry, which many other countries are emulating. That's an example of success, where the private sector can use the existing regulatory framework to drive huge new investments. I mean, we're talking, tens of billions of dollars now in this country and around the world. A less good example is you can sometimes get a government that sets a target which sounds wonderfully ambitious, but then it doesn't do anything to make that target deliverable. So we have a target for there to be no new sales of petrol and diesel vehicles in this country by 2030. No new sales. But the government's done practically nothing to actually affect the way in which that target will be achieved. So we haven't built any of our big battery factories that we need to do. The only one that has actually had government approval hasn't even started construction yet, and may well fold because the finances are so dodgy. There are 20 big, they're called gigafactories. I think that's the Elon Musk influence personally, but 20 Elon Musk style gigafactories for batteries being built in Europe now. Right. So those countries have absolutely seized this story and said, okay, you want to get rid of petrol and diesel vehicles, EVs have got to be as cheap, if not cheaper. We've got to have the infrastructure throughout our country to make it work so that people don't feel uncomfortable, insecure in their use of an electric vehicle. And we're going to drive this now using a combination of state intervention and funding and private sector investment.
Do you think that's what's fun?
It's well, I don't know why I mentioned that example, because I'm less keen on the EV revolution than an awful lot of people.
Yeah, that's a separate conversation, right?
That's a separate conversation.
Well,
exactly.
I mean, we can have it in a moment, but do you think the state knows what to fund?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, not always. I mean, we live in one of those sad countries which still thinks nuclear power is worth putting a lot of government money into.
Yeah.
And we're getting one new power station built now, Hinkley Point in Somerset, and government says it's going to get another one built at Sizewell in Suffolk. Solar, onshore wind, offshore wind, massive investment in energy efficiency, storage, and changing the grid. Those are the 6 things. That's where you get value for money, and you get it within a very short period of time.
Yeah. Could you go through those again?
Solar.
Yeah.
Onshore wind.
Yeah.
Because that's cheapest way of getting renewable electricity. Offshore wind. Essential energy efficiency in everything we do, particularly in our homes where we live, because we have really wretched housing stock in this country. Storage, because you can't really get the full benefit of renewables without storage. And then rethinking the grid, because obviously the grid of the future looks very different from the grid of the past.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the answer to everything, but boy, I tell you, those 6 things.
That'll get us a long way. I mean, that'll get us a long way there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we've looked at, I guess, politics as being a blocker. What are some of the other blockers that you see, and how would we unlock them?
Well, I'm going to say something which is probably not what most people talking about these things would expect. But a blocker for me is the indifference of very large numbers of people.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into a kind of Pollyanna-ish, everybody's worried about this now, and everybody who's in a position to do something about it is doing something about it, because it's just not true. There are millions of indifferent citizens here in the UK and in most rich world countries who really don't want to have their way of life changed, are comfortable with what they've got, even though they're a bit worried about what it looks like now. They don't feel the same level of compassion and solidarity with people in the poor world as I think is going to be required as the climate emergency hits. And essentially, they're just waiting around for something to happen without taking responsibility themselves. So for me, I get a little bit angry when people just put all the blame on business, or put all the blame on government, or stick all the blame on somewhere else, investors or banks or whatever it might be. We have to look at ourselves and say, well, are we really playing the part that we need to play in this change process?
Two things that arise to me there. One is, do we need everyone? And we can talk about that. But the other is, do people know what to do?
We don't need everyone. Because nothing would ever change if we needed everyone. But we need more than we've got at the moment.
We need more than we've got. Yeah, we need more than we've got. And it's going that way. Like, if I think about the number of overworked sustainability and social impact professionals, then certainly they need more help. And I think that's, building their support even 2, 3, 4, 5 times wherever they're working would be a fundamental shift change in terms of because we don't need that many people there. And I think being more intentional about who, going company by company and making sure that they've got people in-house that are trained to do whatever they do, and they've got their support network and they understand the steps that they need to go through, so they don't need to go through the learning. There's some learning processes again. There are some very systematic things that I think that we can do that are probably more bottom-up than a top-down target that we're receiving.
Yeah.
So I think in that respect, like, we don't need that many people, I don't think. And then what you've got for us, when you've got that network, you can be more effective at how you can be proactive in terms of policy, regulation, legislation. Because what at the moment I see happening is you get things highlighted or things shared, but the amount of energy you need as an individual that works in the space to contribute to everything, to have a say on everything, to be part of everything, to know about what's happening is just so much there. But actually, if we could be more systematic about that, I think we'd probably be a lot further forward. And you talked about, in your book, you talk about almost like a war effort. I think we've got that collaboration in pockets, but I don't think we've got that in its sort of open-hearted, open-armed, let's all work together yet. I think there's a lot of sort of.
No, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think you're right. But do you think? You see, for me, the real measure is speed of change, whether those communities of concerned citizens are actually growing, or are they more or less in the same place as they were 5 or 10 years ago? If you talk to all the big supermarkets today, they will always tell you, well, we've got 10 to 15% of our consumers who really care about this. We've got 10 to 15% of consumers who don't give a shit about it. We've got an awful lot of people in the middle, which we can reach out to in all sorts of different ways. And then, Carl, they'll say, and it's been like that for a decade or more. So is it actually moving?
I love what Jamie Broderick was saying about how many tweets it gets a pension fund to move. It was like 13 tweets and a pension fund will pay attention to what you're saying, right? So, and I might have the numbers slightly wrong, but in essence, that's sort of, what we're dealing with. And I think, I don't think it's a lack of, I think, yes, you're right. There's a lot of people don't care, and that can be sort of disheartening.
Good. I think we have.
So I'm not disagreeing with you on that, but I also think that, I think there's a lack of joined up credible options for people that care to go and have an impact on, because it's complex and it's easy to understand that maybe I should use a water bottle to go to work, or maybe I should change to clean energy. But it's difficult to understand how I can have an impact on policy, especially when it's totally fucking disheartening when you've got government cycles that just mean you lose hope in that process, right?
Sure.
That what we've lost is a form of societal or person-based organizational structure that people can invest in, that means that they know that change is going to happen. That's what I think. So I don't think there's a lack of people. I think there's a lack of, where do we go if we're interested and active? And I think a lot more people would join that if they knew we had how many people joined Extinction Rebellion? Millions, right? But the challenge with Extinction Rebellion is it fell really short. There was a cliff after its first 3 actions. There was nothing next. And then it struggled to find, it's a great movement, but it struggled to find any meaningful connection with really tangible, on the ground change. For example, it struggles to get into organizations as a movement. It struggles to get into businesses as a movement because it's had to do that other thing there. So I think I'm talking a lot, but I think it's more that we don't have the system for people to engage with.
Yeah, well, you may be right. I think I'm always astonished that so few people actually translate their concern into what it means for the future. And I get really cross with politicians who say, including our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who say, yes, the reason why I'm really most concerned about this is because I've got 2 young daughters who tell me I really ought to be. And you just think, oh my God, you utter prat. What? Sorry.
I love that. That's my surname. I'm absolutely happy.
I know. I said, as I said it, I thought, oh, really, Jonathon?
Jonathon, I love it. It's fun.
Carl Pratt. I do apologize for that. I really do. But it's... I could have called him something much worse. But
I think perhaps you could have, yeah. Exactly.
But I hate it when parents sort of say, I've come to the conclusion this really matters because my children are telling me this really matters to them, so it's going to really matter to me. And you just think, what have you been doing for the last 20 years when you were having your children and not really paying any attention to the degree to which the world was falling apart around you? It's just kind of drives me mad.
It's also such an easy line. It's like, I'm not racist because my friends...
Exactly. No, it really is. It really is an easy line, and it ought to be banned. It used to be. I used to get quite cross about people who'd say, we're doing this for future generations. And I'd think, actually, how about doing this for people right now? How about sorting out things right now? How about sorting out the appalling housing stock in this country right now? We had the first death of a young child attributed to black mold in a house just earlier this week. And it just sent ripples through the housing community by saying there are so many people living in absolutely shit accommodation. And some of it is so bad, it actually reduces their health massively and sometimes even kills people. And, if that's what we should be doing right now, that's what we should be addressing, because as you address a challenge like that, address fuel poverty, deal with that health issue, you simultaneously get on top of a lot of the climate-related.
That feels really true. And actually what arrives to me is looking at the redistribution of wealth, or the equal distribution of wealth, or the more equal distribution of wealth as well.
Yeah.
And we've seen degrowth gain some popularity, rightly so, right? Like the concept of do we need to keep striving for more growth? How do you think what are your views on how we might start to...
Yeah.
These are oil tankers of capitalism that require changing in terms of their whole...
Both literally and metaphorically.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, as you can imagine, I've wrestled with this for a very long time. I mean, as I mentioned at the start, one of the books that first got me going, this was Limits to Growth.
Yeah.
And in 1972, it said if we carry on growing our economies, regardless of the impact of that growth on natural systems, then we will hit a wall. We will meet physical barriers to being able to go on using the Earth's natural resources and wealth. And sure enough, that's what's happened. We've seen that in terms of the buildup of gas in the atmosphere, collapse of ecosystems, buildup of pollutants in our oceans, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that these limits to growth are real. We still have a dominant political system that says growth is the only thing that tells people we're actually progressing still. Yeah. And into that space now, as you said, has come this idea that we don't need more growth, we need degrowth. Now, the difficulty about the degrowth movement, and it constantly has to justify itself in these terms, is that it sounds as if it doesn't care about massive levels of poverty in the world today.
That's
poverty in their own countries and poverty in particular in poorer emerging and developing economies. And what I don't think has emerged yet is a really powerful story about alternatives to the current model of growth that factors in social justice and addressing poverty as the core element in what that alternative would do. And you said it does mean redistribution. It means a focus on social justice. It means fairness at every point in the economy. In my opinion, without that, growth economics is always going to be corrupted and callous because it just dismisses the interests and concerns of sometimes half the population, if you think about the UK today.
That's so curious because we've seen like a growth in the movement of people having their own farms or their own small holdings, or choosing to not have expensive cars and choosing to just appreciate the balance in life. There's been more than I've seen. Perhaps, you know, for someone like my father who's seen more than that, they probably already noticed that happening before. But like, certainly it's a big change from, you know, where we have been. But then without regulation, I can't see how we would get there without some sort of like leveling of the playing field, and also without looking at GDP, because if GDP is the only thing we like, that feels like unless that's at the top of the pyramid, right? Like GDP, the only thing we measure ourselves on is how do we, like, how does that, like everything else sorely feels like, you know.
Well, there have been different approaches to this, and I can't remember the last count. But there are many, many alternative ways of measuring prosperity and well-being in an economy. Human Development Index, the Well-being Index itself. I think at the last count when I wrote Capitalism as if the World Matters, there was something like 15 different metrics, systems of measurement, which would give you a very different and much more realistic picture of how well a country was or wasn't doing, rather than just relying on GDP. So a lot of work has been done conceptually to come up with better ways of measuring what it is that makes a country successful. And we're still stuck with the dominance of GDP. Politicians don't really talk about other metrics. They still just focus on GDP.
I don't think they fucking understand it, frankly, often. I'm not. Like, I wonder if they really understand. Like, I wonder if you're a politician and has just been a politician all this time, and perhaps this is controversial. I wonder if, unless you've been on the ground, unless you've been part of different things, I don't know how you would have received that knowledge to really understand it. So someone like Caroline Lucas, I trust to understand like some of the, or all of the issues, right? But I wonder how others will even understand it if they have never been in touch with these.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's that, actually, Carl.
Nice. Thanks for challenging me.
I think it's people are trapped in a growth syndrome. Their whole lives have been lived with an implicit assumption that if you want to make life better for yourself and for other people, then you need to be contributing to a story about growth.
Yeah.
And don't forget Liz Truss, in her short-lived period as Trussonomics Meister, she was the one who said growth, growth, growth. But remember who said that before her? Keir Starmer. Mm-hmm. Keir Starmer said the Labour Party now is all about economic growth, 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 growth. So you see, even if you're talking about progressive, more progressive politicians rather than less progressive politicians, they're all trapped in the growth paradigm because it's the only paradigm that they've known through their political career, and they're not investigating what the alternatives would look like.
And actually, for them, that is good. So it's curious. I remember meeting 3 or 4 people that ran coal or power stations in India, and for them, they'd lived their whole lives building these great businesses that gave back to their communities, that supported their communities, and then were left with this moment where they were like, oh, we now have businesses that are seen as being the wrong kinds of businesses, yet we've lived our whole life doing something that's so I can appreciate what you're sharing there, but I still wonder, how do we embed, like, how do we change that top bit? Like, how do we embed better indexes within the existing?
Well, again, I don't want to bang on about the sort of energy efficiency in the housing story, but you've got to think about co-benefits when you're developing policy. You've got to think about what it is that helps improve people's real quality of life, not a fictional number, but real quality of life. And that's where you have to think about community cohesion. You have to think about better health. You have to think about access to good services in a community, sort of minimum basic public services as part of what it is that makes a nation state really deliver for its citizens. You've got to think about those indicators. And when you've got a policy option, so, I don't want to tie it to something quite as specific as the financial crisis here in the UK, but we had a Chancellor of the Exchequer who in the latest budget said and we will address energy efficiency in our housing stock in 3 years' time. Well, what the hell? I mean, this is a crisis right now.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I must keep the frustration out of my voice, but you just hear this. 2019, the bloody Tory party actually had a manifesto pledge to spend £19 billion on improving the quality of housing stock in this country. 19 billion. Very little of that has led to much improvement for people here in the UK so far.
That's why I wonder whether this is one of the challenges, right? And I think one of the things that we've perhaps done too much of, even though sometimes it's successful, is put our faith in a political party, because you go through these sort of cycles of like I'm going to put my energy into that, and then it's going to be, and then it's going to be like you wait 3 or 4 years, and you're like, oh no, but it wasn't, and then you sort of keep all the time, and if you look at that globally, that could happen in any country at any particular time. Even there are some exceptions, but those are not the norm. I don't think. So wondering.
Yeah, I agree. But
yeah, right.
But equally, we have responsibilities as citizens, and part of those responsibilities are political. Because if we choose to opt out of the political system, then guess what? That system is filled by exactly the kind of self-serving forces that are certainly not doing any favors to anybody else.
No, I think we need to engage in the political system. We need to engage in the financial system. We need to engage in our places of work. We need to engage in our places of home. Like, I think we agree on those things. I just wonder whether, I should not broadly, I would imagine completely agree on those things, but I wonder whether we need an alternative system that runs alongside the existing system, and that we acknowledge that parts of the system are broken, and then we can't put our faith all in that part of the system. But then there must be another way that we can mobilize that goes alongside. And it probably is, to sort of bring on what you were saying, it's when we were talking about a tapestry of solutions, or a patchwork of solutions. It's something that's more like, you could have something that worked in freight, for example, or a framework for working in freight that you could then bring into others. And you've done much of that with Forum, but like, I'm interested now, how do you connect those dots? Like, how do we then build, I'm interested in how you build an alternative system.
But you mean alternative economic system, or political citizen-based system, or?
I think it's an important question to explore what you would need. At a certain point, we have to accept that it's really difficult to try and shove the better way of doing things into the old way of doing things, because it just gets so much resistance. It's like trying to put, I don't know, something into jelly. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not a good analogy, but like, it's difficult, right? Like,
it is difficult. No, it is difficult. It's but you can't. The double difficulty is you can't opt out of trying to make this system better, even as you try and build a new system.
Yeah, you've got to do both. You've got to try to do both better, and you've got to build a new system alongside. And I think on the new system alongside, you've got to go where it's quicker. So you've got to go, okay, this is working, let's go fast here. So if in one country you've solved something, let's go fast here, and then let's scale that up to other countries. If in one company you've done something, let's go fast here and then scale that up. Like, that feels like then
exactly. No, it's the right kind of balancing act to get sorted. I mean, it's not a new problem. It's always been, when people are looking at political change and transitions, it's always the same dynamic that you're looking at. I think it was Gramsci who said the crisis consists in the fact that the old is dying and the future cannot yet be born. And I have really seen that description of the impasse we're in at the moment, because the past is dying. There is no question about that.
Yeah. And there's this sort of like final throes which you can see crumbling. Even if you,
it really is, and it's painful. And as it dies, of course, it causes a lot of damage. And the future is being born. I mean, you can see what the contours of that new world looks like.
Yes.
So you've got some people who are intent on accelerating the death of the old system. You've got some people who are intent on bringing forward the future system through practice, not just through ideas. And these two things coexist. That's why it looks like quite muddle all the time, because you've got different forces at work in different parts of this dynamic. So it's messy.
Well, it's such a tension to hold everything that's happening. There's so many elements that are happening right now that it's such an interesting tension to be.
Yeah. Well, I'm very conscious of that, because when we set the forum up in 1996, we set up as a solutions-based organization. And what we said is, we don't campaign against anything. We campaign for the solutions to the problems that we face. And as an organization, that's what we do. For me personally, I've got too much anger bubbling around in my own psychological makeup just to stick with building solutions, which is why I continue to pull out my big stick and beat up on the people who I think are part of the dying past, but they're not dying fast enough. And I want to make them die faster. So that obviously isn't forum for the future. In fact, even saying that will probably I've now breached the code of conduct for a forum for the future, because we're not really like that as we're nothing like that as an organization.
It's a difficult balance to hold, isn't it? That, like, the stick plus also let's help you with carrots. Like, it's a difficult balance.
It is difficult. It is, but I've got both in my kit bag, and I'll get them out depending on who I'm with and what the circumstances are, what I'm feeling like on that day. And sometimes my ability to give the positive messages depend on how I'm feeling about the integrity of the people that we're working with, the prospect for moving things faster. It's all mixed up in there.
Well, I've certainly appreciated both looking at what you and the people that built Forum built and other elements that you built as well, and learning from that, and also your time in sort of helping me at those very early stages. It's good.
And we've always tried to be very supportive of all the new ways of making this kind of approach work, because it's a pluriverse of brilliant, new, innovative ways of helping people come together in trust-based communities to bring about change, which results in better lives for more people, basically. And there's never going to be one route to that. It's always going to be multiple different routes at different scales in different parts of our lives. So for us in the forum, it's always been part of our role to work with those change makers, as you did with Future Planet, and to sort of see what the combined effect looks like. That's what the story is. That's where transformation comes.
Well, I really feel that, and I feel our movement is more collaborative now than it has been, but I still think has a long, long way. Like, I found solace in our connection, but there's lots of people that didn't have time, and so that's okay, right? That's just how it happens. But I think that that as a movement, we need to be a lot more joined up. I think that's definitely something that I've noticed, and a lot more open to collaborate and a lot more open to share, which I'm seeing starting, and it's complicated, but it almost feels like one of the biggest changes that could happen organizationally would be to have teams that are focused on collaboration, and that's their whole business, is to look outside with no vested interest in themselves apart from to do good or to do better, like pre-competitive. I think that would be a really interesting thing to see start happening. I haven't seen that in
No, there's tension there, Carl.
Yeah, there is.
I've throughout my life, I've come up against people, often funders in charities, for instance, who say, "God, there's so many organizations, you're all doing slightly different things, but you all seem to be in roughly the same place. Why don't you combine forces and work together?" And then you think, well, sometimes that works, but a lot of the time it doesn't work. And you've just got to accept that this is a very diverse movement with lots of
true, right? But I would also say that for me, collaboration is what can you do together and what don't you need to do together. So you need lots of people that are doing lots of different things in the world that they see. That feels true.
Yeah.
And that's great, because otherwise you wouldn't get people helping other people in the way that they need to be helped. That's fine. But there's things like data. So what Gavin Starks is doing with Icebreaker One is super interesting. Like, how do we have open data so we can all sort of figure out? I think there are things that we really need to
No, I agree. No, absolutely.
Right? Like, I think. Yeah. So we have a short amount of time to wrap up. I wonder whether a nice, gentle easing out of the conversation would be to say, what are we going for? Like, like, what is that future when we've got past all the messiness? Like, what does it feel like? What's it like? What is that future like? What, and I think also maybe to speak a bit to the hope that you mentioned in A Hope in Hell, which is a fantastic book, and I love the way that you framed it around hope as well. That feels like a nice way to like lead us out and lead everyone out from the.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, you need to go to that place at the end of all of this stuff, because if you haven't got that place available to you, it's very difficult to keep your energy going. It's very difficult to remain committed to doing the things we need to do. It's certainly difficult to stay in service to that wider, bigger cause, that's for sure. So for me, the hope still resides in the chances that we now have to build a different understanding of what society could look like, much more compassionate, much more supportive, much more community-based, much less dependent on consumerism, much less dependent on the idea that money is the means by which we buy happiness, much gentler in a way. And of course, much more attuned to the natural world. You know, we've just got to get back to some essential understanding here. Nature has been practicing what good life on Earth looks like for billions of years. And we still have a ton of stuff to learn from nature, which we need to bring into our sense of what progress looks like, to inform it better, to enrich it with a different understanding. So this whole wonderful thing called biomimicry, which I love, which is where we take lessons from the natural world and we then use those lessons to help shape our view of architecture of the built environment, of regenerative farming, of new materials, of different ways of manufacturing. You bring back in that learning from nature. And there's huge power as well as hopefulness in all of that.
I love the idea of falling into the arms of nature, or like just sort of, we've sort of strived for so much, and we've been determined to show there's the things we can build and things we can do without really paying attention to our natural rhythm and connection with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm glad that you ended with nature. That feels nice because we moved.
Good.
It's really nice. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks,
good.
Man.
Well, very nice to have a chance to catch up, Carl. I'm really sorry to have traduced your name again by slagging off our...
I don't mind that too.
But good to hear too about so much of the energy you're bringing to bear on this through Future Planet. It is very inspiring. So it's brilliant.
Please like, rate and share this widely on your social channels. The more people that we can welcome to join us on the journey and support the change makers we champion, the faster we can combat climate change, battle biodiversity loss, and co-create a future we can all love.
Where do we go next? What questions did this spark for you? Would you like to know more about a particular topic? Who shall we adventure to? What shall we ask them? Where shall we go? What shall we build? How shall we do this together? Do you have any questions or comments? Join the Future Planet community of action at futureplanet.love to sign in, sign up, and get involved. Together, we can.